Hi, I'm David Stoecker, and I want to welcome you to the Better Life in Recovery #Hope Dealer Movement podcast. As a visible and vocal member of the recovery community since 2009, I'm frequently asked questions and for advice from people all the time. Some are curious, some are still using, some are in recovery, and some people just care about somebody who's currently struggling with a hurt habit or hang-up. If people in my community have those questions, I guarantee that people everywhere are looking for answers as well. We started this podcast to give you answers and support, because not only is recovery real, it is amazing. Hope you enjoy the show. If you followed any of the other podcasts, especially the last couple topic ones, you'll notice that I always say I am to recovery for the Jesus people, and to Jesus for the recovery people, and to recovery for the harm reduction people, and to harm reduction for the recovery people. So it's kind of a weird spot to be in, but I am still trying to figure out harm reduction. And to help me in that discussion, I have Chad Sabora, who I would say is one of probably the country's best experts, biggest experts on harm reduction. So, Chad, introduce yourself.
David, thank you for having me. My name is Chad Sabora. I'm also a person in long-term recovery since June 9th, 2011. I'm a former prosecutor from Chicago, Illinois, who now lives in St. Louis, Missouri, and I am the co-founder and executive director of what we call a hybrid recovery community center, where we involve harm reduction as part of the continuum of care as we treat our consumers that either struggle with substance use disorder, are in recovery from substance use disorder, and loved ones, family members that are dealing with an individual in either case, either still actively using or in recovery.
Okay. So, me and you have had many, many discussions. I've trained, I wouldn't even want to get into how many people I have Narcan trained over the past few years. And you were the first person that I ever saw do a Narcan training. Also, whenever I struggle with some of the concepts of harm reduction, you're the person that I tend to go to. I know that there's things I've struggled with, and you have filled my inbox with study after study after study, and that's one thing I've never been able to argue against is research. I'm a big fan of research over anecdotal experiences, so I know that's been helpful, but you've watched harm reduction grow over the last 8 years. In fact, I'm sure you watched it. You're from Chicago, so that was one of the birthplaces in our country, really.
Birthplaces for, naloxone distribution. So harm reduction in this country, we can go back to 1968 when they put seatbelts in cars as one of the first harm reduction actions that occurred, because it encompasses all areas of life, not just people that use substance use, whether recreationally or with problematic consequences. I'm losing myself there. So, but the birth of the harm reduction movement for people that use drugs really came from the HIV epidemic in the 80s. That's when the first tier of harm reduction warriors came together. And their goal was to reduce the spread of HIV. Heroin use, IV drug use has been an issue in this country since the 1890s. However, it was never a forefront issue. It was never an epidemic. It slightly was in the 70s following the Vietnam War. But the real goals in those beginning movements were around access to condoms for individuals engaging in risky sexual behavior, and access to needles for individuals that may have been sharing needles. So that was the birth of the substance use harm reduction moves in this country. But other harm reduction around the world date back to the opening of the first syringe access program in Switzerland in the mid-70s, and the opening of the first safe injection, whatever you want to call it, safe injection, safe consumption site in Bern, Switzerland in 1986. So these models, these philosophies, these attitudes towards people who use drugs is nothing new.
Right.
Chicago was the birthplace of naloxone distribution by a gentleman who's recently passed named Dan Big. who founded Any Positive Change and the Chicago Recovery Alliance. And he gave the first active heroin user a vial of Narcan in Chicago in 1996. He is responsible for almost every Narcan distribution program in this country, up to the federal grants that recently came down that allow to expand purchasing and access to Naloxone. Prior to that, almost all the connections, the supplies, everything came out of Dan Big and his warehouse in Chicago.
Okay. And that's why I kind of said I thought it was birthed out of Illinois, was because of Dan. So as it's grown, it has, I don't know, I think that it can work so well with recovery, but it seems like there's also some clashes.
Yes.
With recovery. I've experienced some of those. I talked to somebody while I was in Vegas that, I don't know why I let somebody get my goat, but I was talking about the Recovery Community Center and opening up a separate location or doing a mobile if we if we got syringe access passed in our state. And this kid looked at me and he's like, so you're not open to multiple pathways? And I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? And he's like, well, if you're not going to do that there in your center, then you're not open to multiple pathways. And
I would disagree with that.
And he kind of got my goat, but I think it's almost like politics. You have one side that's taking recovery is, they spin it their way, right? Recovery is just being clean and being abstinent, and that's all that really matters. And then you've got the other side that says, well, I can have chaotic use, and if I say I'm in recovery, I'm in recovery. And I think the truth falls somewhere in the middle.
It does.
Like it does on both discussions, and I think sometimes we get caught up in either our feelings or in our beliefs.
And our anecdotal visuals.
Absolutely. So I contacted you not long ago about recovery and that word recovery because I guess entering into recovery, I worked treatment for 8.5 years. And I have just come over the last several years onto kind of the recovery advocacy side. I guess I did it a little bit while I was still a therapist.
You did.
But as a therapist, when I think of recovery, I think of that holistic change. Now, I can see it with medication. I can see, I consider somebody who is prescribed medication in recovery. Period. It's not, they don't have medicated assisted recovery any more than I have Jesus assisted recovery. It's just recovery.
Correct.
And I struggled because I see it as the entire all-encompassing thing. And there's the discussion that, somebody's in recovery if they
say they're in recovery.
Not just if they say they're in recovery, but, somebody's in recovery. And I'm okay with that one. If somebody wants to say they're in recovery, but I had somebody say, well, I believe I've heard you say it, where if somebody is going to a syringe access and they're in recovery, and I struggled with that.
Right, because you're using the absolute definition of recovery based on your clinical experience. So the people you're going to see in a clinical setting are the minority. The 10% of people that use substance use that develop severe problematic, chaotic consequences to their use. That's who you're going to see. They do not represent the whole picture of people that use substances. They don't even represent the whole picture of people that use substances with some problems, some chaotic use. They represent that far end spectrum. So that's where you're basing this definition of recovery on, is this absolute thing. But for others, it is going to look different. And when I say someone that uses a needle exchange program is in recovery, I'm not saying they're in recovery from problematic substance use. I'm saying they're in recovery from a risky behavior that could spread blood pathogen disorders such as hepatitis C or HIV. That's what they are in recovery from, and they are. Now, I don't want to say somebody's in recovery and then add this whole dialogue of what they're in recovery from, but that person is in recovery from that area. Now, what can we work on next?
Right.
Can we work on, let's work on putting you in recovery from risky behavior that could cause you an overdose. Good. Okay, now we've got that done. Okay, because a lot of the times we have to walk very slowly with people. And there are people out there right now that will use substances to the day they die, and they will have no problematic use whatsoever. And maybe for a year or two in their lives, they'll have a physical dependence on an opioid, it'll cause some problems, and they are successfully able to put down the opioid. Now these people will successfully be able to put down the opioid, but continue to drink alcohol and smoke marijuana without returning to problematic opioid or use. Those people exist, without a doubt, 100%. So for those people, I would say, yes, they are in recovery. Because, the opposite of recovery is problematic, chaotic substance use. So if having a beer once in a while with dinner, a glass of wine, or smoking pot on the weekends doesn't cause problematic substance use, are they falling into that category that would require a recovery definition? I would say no. Their heroin use, opiate use that cause those problematic issues, yes, then that the abstaining from that drug qualifies him to be in recovery. I'll use my dad, for example. My dad got sober from heroin in 1970. Long before he met my mom, had me, he was a clinician and then an executive at Gateway Foundation, which is a very large treatment center. My dad, I saw him drunk. He never picked up opiates after 1970, after he met my mom. And funny side note for those listening that may follow the William White papers, my dad was actually Bill White's counselor in treatment.
That's pretty sinking huge.
So I saw my dad drunk once in his life. There was booze in our home. Sunday night dinners, my dad would have one glass of wine. He didn't smoke pot, and probably, I don't even think he ever really did when he was using drugs in the 60s and 70s. I think he was just a heroin addict. And I will qualify my dad as somebody that died 35 years in recovery. So since he was able to put down the substance that caused chaotic use and still occasionally have a glass of wine or a beer at a social event, he was in recovery. And I can't see anybody arguing any different. No DUIs, no problems with marriage, no problems with work, no problems with anything, no drinking to intoxication except maybe once or twice. So when I look at my father's story, how can we not see that as truth?
Right. Because there's no addiction. Because I always think, like, the difference between dependence and addiction.
Yeah.
Addiction is continued use despite negative consequences.
Exactly. Exactly. So this isn't black and white, It's especially not black and white with our advice to loved ones now when our drug supply has been poisoned by fentanyl. People are talking about, you kick them out, do this, do that. No, we don't have those choices anymore.
Right.
When I was using, fentanyl was very hard to come by. But now these kids using right now, they're not going to have the, and I'm going to call the benefit of multiple bottoms. I hate the word bottoms, but I'm going to use it because it's a term that people understand. They're not going to have the benefit of getting arrested a few times, of picking up 20 different white key tags, of having the families kick them out, of losing. They will die before they get the consequences that you and I got.
Right.
That led to our recovery. So we have to change our approach to the whole thing.
Well, didn't you guys, not to interrupt, but didn't you guys test multiple samples whenever the drug policy, when the big...
Yeah, we had a mass spectrometer, and we bought... God, I'm admitting to a felony. Somebody we know happened to have in their possession capsules of what was believed to be heroin. Those capsules were tested by a drug testing mass spectrometer, and no heroin. And capsules from the same batch, the same dealer, ranged from 3 to 40% fentanyl concentration. Dealers in St. Louis are not necessarily adding the fentanyl. It's being put in long before it gets up here. They're still following the drug cutting protocol of heroin, which is utilizing a coffee grinder. You cannot cut fentanyl with a coffee grinder. It just does not work. The density is different, the disbursement, how it works. There are other drug cutting methods that have to be used in order to properly cut that drug, and they're not being used, which is creating a great difference in even the same batches from
Scary.
Dose to dose. Very scary. But then, as a harm reductionist, I have to be pragmatic about the situation and not live in denial, because that's a lot of our drug policy is living in denial.
Right.
Fentanyl is here. Fentanyl is not going anywhere anytime soon. So what are our choices as activists, as outreach workers, as people trying to save people's lives and get them into recovery? Do we let them continue to utilize a very dangerous cutting system, or do we try to find out the safest way for people to ingest that drug that they want to ingest, despite all our pleadings, despite the family's pleadings, despite the options put in front of them? Until they are ready, they will continue to use that substance. So isn't it our job to find a safer way for them to use that substance that is not enabling? And I've been called an enabler for that. But there has to be a middle ground where we can all meet at, where we can say, yes, yeah, fentanyl represents our opioid supply now. The current route of administration and cutting agents that are being used are deadly. They could be safer. It makes perfect sense in my mind.
Right, and that's something I think I'm with you on. I mean, we stock at the Springfield Recovery Community Center. We have Narcan and Narcan trainings. We have fentanyl test strips. I will continue to go to Jeff City and testify and talk to the senators and state reps that I run into about syringe access and why it's vital to what we have. You know, it doesn't make any sense to me. I think whenever you look at it on paper, it's a no-brainer. Fiscally,
I mean,
health-wise, I mean, compassionately, I mean, I don't think that there's a single way it doesn't make sense. And what amazes me, like, I live in Springfield. You live in St. Louis. It's a little more progressive, a little more liberal. I live basically in the buckle of the Bible Belt. I mean, it is conservative, Christian, and the lack of compassion I see from so many people in my community amazes me. I mean, there's some amazing people in my community, but overall, it amazes me how ignorant and compassionless people are whenever it comes to addiction and substance misuse and even recovery.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's, I think that I put that a lot on the recovery side. I think far too long people in recovery have stayed anonymous and not been visible and vocal in their communities once they've gotten better, and because of that, when people hear about substance use, they don't think about people coming out on the other side. They
Correct.
think of all the negatives.
Yeah, they do. And also people that are in recovery that are choosing to recover out loud, they have to be careful not to further stigmatize their own disorder. Language is important. Medications are important. Harm reduction is important. But it's like we're getting backlash for our efforts from the general public that's very ignorant. And then we're also getting backlash from the recovery community calling us enablers. I heard there's a meeting format called Medication Assisted Recovery Anonymous, right? And that includes all medications. That includes people using medical marijuana. And I heard a gentleman that I know in recovery say, why don't we just call it Active Addiction Anonymous? And the amount of ignorance behind that just blows my mind, because they do not still comprehend the fact that somebody can use a recreational substance with no significant consequences. And just because of the DEA scheduling of that substance, they are deciding on the validity of that person's pathways. So if the DEA came out today and said, okay, we're going to make marijuana Schedule 4, and we're going to make, give me a good Schedule 4 substance. I'm thinking off the top of my head. And we're going to make just a random Schedule 4,
Right.
And we're going to make Prozac a Schedule 1. Okay, so we're gonna do a huge switch today. We're gonna make marijuana is now a Schedule 4 substance, prescribable, refills, yada yada yada. Prozac is now a Schedule 1. Everybody, most people in recovery would quickly just flip. Well, now, it's okay if you're on marijuana, but if you're on Prozac, you're not clean. You know, it's like we give so much weight to the FDA and DEA's classifications that are riddled with BS.
Right.
And we give weight to an agonist, and when we talk about MAT medications such as buprenorphine, methadone, or naltrexone, they put so much validity on, well, these two, methadone and buprenorphine, are agonists. They're not okay. Okay, well, this one, Vivitrol, that's an antagonist. That's okay for you to take. All right, Junior, well, let's look at the data. The data for being on an agonist versus an antagonist blows it away. I mean, every single research study out there shows that methadone or buprenorphine gives some people a much better chance of recovery in life than Vivitrol. But you want people to risk their lives over your personal opinions that are not based on science. And it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
Because you see it as well as I do. I'm not okay with Suboxone, but I'm okay with you taking Vivitrol. Well, you're not a doctor. It's none of your business.
And what amazes me is I see therapists in treatment centers that are primarily 12-step treatment centers, and they mostly come from a 12-step background themselves. But I'm like, you're in active recovery, and you're a therapist, and yet you're this ignorant when it comes to the benefits of medication.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, every study you look at, people live longer. And they also go to more meetings. They tend to be more likely to have a sponsor and work steps if they're on medication than if they have an opioid use disorder and they're not on medication.
But here's the thing about meetings, and we have data to back this up. If somebody wants to go to meetings, it is 100% without a doubt going to make their recovery stronger. However, if somebody is adamant, dead set against going to 12-step meetings and they're forced to, it's going to make it worse.
Well, if you force me to do anything.
Yeah. But, I mean, we just have the data to back these things up. And yet people are still forced to attend 12-step meetings by the criminal justice system, which is a violation of, constitutional rights. There's case law on this now that most people are ignoring. Yet we have to offer them some clinical options, but we have to stop putting barriers in front of getting access to medication. Overeating, food addictions are just as valid, work same part of the brain as drug addiction, without a doubt. There's Overeaters Anonymous. It's, however, if I have substance use disorder and I go to a doctor to get my medication to save my life, I will be given barriers. I will be given, you have to do this to get your medication. All right? No marijuana. No benzos, unless I prescribe them, right? Now let's take the overeater that suffers from the same brain disorder as the drug user. I need to go to my doctor to get cholesterol medication. There are no barriers. You don't have to go to any meetings. You come back, your lipids come back showing that you ate McDonald's for 2 weeks straight. Even the doctor told you not to eat McDonald's for 2 weeks straight. Guess what? The doctor will not cut off your life-saving medication.
Right.
But they'll do it for the substance user that doesn't follow the doctor's protocols and may go smoke marijuana. There's no difference whatsoever.
Well, is there really a difference between doctors having to jump through hoops or even having to have separate buildings for like an OBOT? Look at all the hoops a doctor has to jump through in order to prescribe methadone or buprenorphine.
Yeah, our methadone and buprenorphine restrictions from the federal government are killing people. Almost every other civilized country, you can dose methadone at a pharmacy. And we do not allow that here. Say you live in Jefferson County, Missouri, and you need to be on methadone. You can't even take buses to the methadone clinic. With the way our transit system is set up, there's no way to get to the methadone clinic depending on where you live. It is just, our policies kill people.
Well, in a lot of communities, there isn't.
Yeah.
And you may not have a doctor that's waivered in a lot of communities for bupe either.
Right.
It definitely, I agree with you whenever it comes to barriers that we put up. I think you guys recently, you helped write a bill that I didn't think was needed because I worked in treatment court in Greene County, and in Greene County we had a judge that was actually educated.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize that we still had judges in the state of Missouri that were
disallowing you.
Demanding people get off their medication before they would allow them into treatment court, or telling them they couldn't graduate as long as they were on their medication.
It wasn't just treatment court, veterans court, mental health court, safety court, family court situations. Yeah, so we had to put a law on the books in Missouri saying judges could no longer dictate the use of methadone or buprenorphine as a requirement to enter a program or to successfully graduate a program. And we still have a lot to fix, but I think we're getting off topic from harm reduction.
Well, I think that's part of harm reduction, though.
No, it is.
His lobbying for those bills, and maybe lobbying is a bad word, advocating for those bills so that we can get bills that actually prolong life. But yeah, getting back to what we were originally talking about, I think whenever we talked on the phone, I realized that it was semantics. It was tomato.
Yeah.
What you called recovery from a harmful behavior, I called making healthier choices. So literally, we're just throwing different words at it.
Yeah. But sometimes I'm gonna intentionally annoy the old timers by using that recovery word because I want to I believe it's a benefit when somebody challenges your core beliefs and makes you think. You've got guys that have been in this policy world, I won't mention names, for 20 plus years who are dead set in their ways. Some of these people need to be shaken up a little bit, pissed off a little bit. So I'm going to do some things that may seem controversial, but it's just an opportunity to shake you out of that complacency you found yourself in, doing the same thing, pushing for the same recovery policies for 20 years. We have to be more brazen. We have to be more progressive. So, some of it is my true beliefs, and some of it are just tactics to shake some things up with people and say, listen, let's look at this different. Let's treat people different. Let's start giving people that use drugs actively jobs at RCCs, at OBOTs, at other places. Let's employ them. They are a valuable resource as far as what's going on in the using community. You've been sober 10 years?
Yeah.
I've been sober 8. I have no idea anymore. What it's like out there. We have a valuable resource. And naloxone distribution in itself, 85% of all overdose reversals are done by peers, fellow drug users. We have to re-educate people. We were educated, you and I, growing up, that drug users are like the Tasmanian devil, run around, complete destruction, don't care about life or death, and some of that is true.
And I think that's one of the problems.
But some of that is true, however, despite our chaotic drug use, despite that we will choose drugs over everything else, we don't want to die. And we do not want to contract a disease. Right. That is why we know that people will use needle exchange programs. Drug users will save each other's lives. People that use there's a safe injection site in Vancouver, British Columbia called Onsite. They have 487 visits a day. So we know that when given these tools, drug users will use them. Because one of the biggest blowbacks you and I get when we push these progressive policies is no drug users are going to use those services. They don't care. No, they do. Let's re-educate people about this disorder.
Right.
And about the behaviors that come with the disorder. Will I rob from you? Yes. Will I say horrible things in the grips of my addiction? Yes, without a doubt. It is not me. But will I do everything I can to preserve my life? Because deep down inside, someday I want recovery? Yes.
Yeah, I think that when you talk about the place in Vancouver, I want to say I saw a study that was talking about, well, it was an article that talked about the first year it was open.
Yeah.
And I think what really stood out to me is they had I think it was 247 overdoses the first year that they were open, and they reversed every single one of them. Yeah. So that's 247 people that got a second chance. That's 247 kids that went home to their parents that their parents didn't have to bury. So, I think that's part of the positive.
And there's no increase in drug use with these facilities. Crime doesn't go up or go down. That's a wash. However, it is a pathway to treatment. And sometimes when we say multiple pathways, we're also meaning multiple pathways to get into treatment. Okay? Right. So multiple pathways could be an arrest, a family intervention, rock bottom, a needle exchange program, a safe consumption site. There's multiple pathways to get help. Safe consumption sites are definitely one of them. People blast them saying they don't save lives. There were 486 overdoses last week there. Yeah, but nobody died.
Right.
So there's a bad batch of drugs going around in Vancouver right now. People use there. Nobody died there. And right next to Onsite is Insight. Insight is a medical detox program where people can just walk right in there and get help. These systems work. They've been around in Europe since, like I said, the first safe injection site opened in Bern, Switzerland in 1986 at an old coffee shop. There are 114 currently operating around the world. More are opening. IV drug use is taken over. It's not taboo anymore. We have to have pragmatic solutions for these kids.
I remember the first time I assessed a kid who told me the very first drug he ever used was heroin IV.
Yeah.
Because generally people come in and the first drug they ever tried was generally alcohol.
Tobacco.
You might get somebody who's like, I did a line or something like that. But to come in and be like, yeah, the first thing I ever did, I did IV. It was like, what the heck? It is. It's almost become the in thing.
Yeah. It has, unfortunately. And if we're going to save lives and be effective advocates in what we do, we can't have blinders on saying recovery's great. Go to a meeting. How many times did people tell that to me and you?
I still, I'm one of those weird people.
Okay.
I do everything different.
Okay.
I don't go to meetings,
All
even
right.
though I have a ton
But
of
I'm just
meetings
saying,
at the recovery
I'm just saying,
community
how
center.
many times did people tell you, get help, it's like, it's going to take what it takes.
Meeting makers make it, so obviously I should be high right now because I don't go to meetings.
Yeah.
I'm also one of those weird people with mental health diagnosis that doesn't medicate my mental health diagnosis, which it's weird, always been weird to me. Where addiction, if you take your medication, they're like, you're not well. Yeah. And with mental health, if you do take your if you don't take your medication, you're not well.
So you're not well, David.
So the truth is, it's definitely up to a person's choice. Yeah. The medication or not medication, and I think there's far too many people weighing in. I know parents that have buried their kids because their kid went to a meeting and was ridiculed for picking up a 6-month key tag and then admitting that, and then saying, yeah, I've got the 6 months thanks to
Suboxone.
Yeah. And literally, I know 2 teenagers that are dead now within 48 hours of a meeting where they were just roasted by everybody there. Yeah. Because now, guess what? Everybody there preaches at the kid as it goes around the circle and tells him what a piece of crap he is and how he's not really clean.
Yeah, and then you have other people that are known in the recovery circle, known on social media, that run around making these memes, making fun of people on Suboxone. It's like, what is wrong with you? Yeah. We have a medication that is saving people's lives, and, you're stigmatizing a disease that's already stigmatized, and you suffer from this disease. You don't agree with it? Fine, don't. It's like the old adage. You don't agree with guns? Don't own a gun. Don't agree with gay marriage? Don't marry the same sex. Don't agree with abortion? Don't have one. Don't agree with medication? Don't take it. But stop judging other people, because that goes against the core principles of the program that we work.
There's a quote by Bill W. It was in one of the grapevines. I think it's from the 60s when he was somewhere I think it was in Canada. Yep. And he basically said, I'll just summarize it. If anybody wants information on it, get a hold of me and I will be more than happy to send it to you. But he basically said that his biggest fear was that there would become a rigid dogma. Yeah. In the community that would look at it like our way is the only way.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And would marginalize everybody else. And unfortunately, I think that has definitely happened. I tend to see it actually more on the NA side than the AA side.
Yeah, it's and very strange too. But yeah, if Bill W. and Dr. Bob were alive today, I believe they would be very disheartened of what's happened to their program. Without a doubt, especially when it comes to medication, especially since Bill W. and the father of methadone treatment, Dr. Vincent Toll, were close friends. For those listening to this that don't know this fact, methadone maintenance treatment started at Rikers Island in the 50s by a guy named Dr. DuPont, just as a whim. Then it was picked up by Dr. Vincent Toll in the 60s. Who really created the OTP program with MMT. Dr. Dole sat on the board of trustees for Alcoholics Anonymous. He and Bill were friends. Bill W. Asked Dr. Dole to create a version of methadone for alcoholics. As Bill described it, it was for the alcoholics who could not stay sober long enough to experience the spiritual awakening of working the 12 steps. So there's a lot of misinformation out there. And one of the biggest thing that grinds my gears, if I'm going to talk like Peter Griffin.
And why wouldn't you?
Yeah, is I hear people on Facebook saying that methadone and Suboxone was designed for detox. It should only be used for detox. Methadone, neither drugs were ever invented to treat opiate use disorder. Methadone was invented in the 50s during a poppy shortage during World War II. It was also a great drug to give soldiers, since you could dose once a day. And then it was, as an experiment, basically, used on prisoners in Rikers Island to see if they could treat their heroin addiction. So it was never intended for detox. Its first experiment being used was intended for maintenance. Suboxone was invented, or buprenorphine was invented in the 70s in the UK as a safer painkiller because it's a partial agonist that doesn't fully suppress the respiratory system. It's a horrible analgesic. It does not work well as a painkiller, so they scrapped it. However, since it has a very long half-life, much like methadone, they started doing experiments, seeing if they could use it to treat substance use disorder, and the data was very powerful behind it. I would say more powerful than methadone In my opinion, I believe to this day the only reason that the methadone data still surpasses the buprenorphine data is because there's 50 more years of it. But as far as the outcomes, they're very similar, and since buprenorphine is a partial agonist, you cannot overdose on it. I do believe to be the safer alternative. Methadone is great. I put a lot of people on methadone. I put a lot of people on Vivitrol, and I direct a lot of people, just get your ass to a 12-step meeting. It just depends on the person.
Right. So going back really quick, I do want to say that I know a lot of people hear the bupe thing.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I can't overdose on this. But still, I mean, you can still override that through synergy, through mixing.
Yeah, I mean, you can.
You know, and that's one thing I want to put out there.
Yeah, on its own. Right, on its own, you cannot have full respiratory suppression on a partial opioid agonist, which buprenorphine is.
And that's amazing.
Yeah. However, if you combine another respiratory suppressant on top of that drug, be it alcohol or benzodiazepines, yes, you could experience an overdose. Same with a lot of the misinformation that's going around with a herb called kratom. Kratom is impossible on its own to overdose on. It has a dormant antagonist that only gets activated upon overuse, which will make the user sick, vomit, feel uncomfortable, and they will not physically be able to take any more of the medication. So another drug you cannot overdose on. However, if I'm using kratom with methadone, with Xanax, with alcohol, yes, that polysubstance use could cause respiratory suppression and death. But it's on its own, so those drugs cannot cause death.
And that's why I think it's one of the, I don't know, I hate to say it. Well, I don't hate to say it, actually. I think it's one of the best medications we have out there, because it doesn't matter if you take 32 milligrams or 320 milligrams.
Your body's only going to process 32 milligrams that day.
It's still going to hit that ceiling, and that ceiling is going to save lives.
Yes.
You know, and I was going to say something about bupe, and then I started listening to you, and I was just like, wow, this guy's kind of smart. So, and I completely forgot what I was going to say. There's also this belief that in a lot of the communities that it's a short-term thing, and from every study that I have ever seen, it doesn't matter if somebody is titrated off bupe at 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, their recurrence to use and their risk of overdose increases every single time that they're removed. That doesn't mean that some people aren't going to reach that point on their own where they say, hey, I want to discontinue.
Yeah.
But there's too many people that don't have MD after their name that are trying to make medical decisions for somebody,
right,
and it's lethal.
So there is zero difference on the data from 3 days detox on bupe up to 3 months. Zero difference. It really does nothing. Our key marker points when it comes to when we're seeing bupe be successful for reducing mortality and increasing retention and recovery is 9 months to a year. Once we hit those two markers, those are key markers for doing bupe maintenance, then you really have reduced your risk of return to use and dying from an overdose by using if you get to that year point. That should be an evaluation point from a medical doctor. And, you know, I hear a lot of the times that bupe doesn't work. Suboxone does not work. And I asked the person, explain this to me. Well, I tried to come off it on my own. I'm like, okay, well, let's stop. Let's stop right there. Okay, let's examine your statement. I tried to come off Suboxone on my own. I took Suboxone. I did it on my own. All right, so let me ask you a question. You're going to play the person that told that to me. So if you went to a 12-step meeting, you didn't get a sponsor, you didn't work steps, or you worked steps yourself as your own sponsor, you didn't get a service job, you basically didn't do anything you were supposed to do, does that mean 12 steps doesn't work?
Well, no.
Well, okay.
Because 12 steps work because, you know, they work if you work them.
Right. So if you want to successfully work a Suboxone maintenance program, you have to do the same type of principles that you would do in a 12-step program. You have to talk to somebody and work with somebody that has successfully gone on Suboxone and successfully titrated off it with minimal side effects.
Right.
Same principle. And you know what? Going back, I know you're not a program person, and I'm not so much anymore. But it goes back to the third step.
No, I'm not. It's not that I'm not a program person. Let me make that clear. It's not something that worked for me.
Right.
But I have
No,
lots
but just
of friends
currently,
that
No,
are.
I'm saying, but a lot of this stuff, I will revert back to the third step. It is taking your will out of the picture and taking suggestions from somebody that's done it before. I didn't go to my first trial, when I was a lawyer, and just show up and argue a case. I went to law school first.
Right.
I learned from people that had done this before. So if you're going to go on Suboxone, don't do it on your own. Get involved in a program. Talk to people that were successful on getting on Suboxone and getting off it, and take their suggestions. If you try to do it on your own, you will probably fail. That does not mean that Suboxone does not work. Just like if you try to work a 12-step program on your own and fail, that does not mean that 12-step programs doesn't work. And there's too much of that attitude that I see.
And it's also, I think, why we have other medications out there. It's why we have multiple pathways.
Yeah.
And it amazes me how many people work a humble program that feel that their way is the only way and everybody's recovery needs to look like theirs.
Yeah.
And I think that tends to be a major problem that we see.
It's a huge problem. And a huge problem is ego.
Yeah.
And people feel like that if somebody recovers differently than I did, it's a threat to my recovery. If you can stop shooting heroin and still smoke weed and get drunk and I'm jealous a little bit, but it's not a threat.
Right.
And people perceive it as a threat.
Right, and I think it's just figuring that out. I remember, I don't know, I had friends that I used to deal to, and people tell me that these people don't exist, but back when I dealt meth, I had a couple, they had kids, and they got 4 weeks, they worked together, they got 4 weeks of vacation a year. Mm-hmm. And 2 weeks, they would take their kids on vacation. Yeah. And the other 2 weeks, they'd take it every 6 months. They would drop their kids off at grandparents, come to me, get an 8-ball and syringes. Yeah. They would party for 5 days, sleep for 2, go pick their kids back up, and then 6 months later, they would use meth again.
There's people out there that exist. It's like we get a little bit of flack from running a syringe access program because people will come into a syringe access program and bring their children. And people are like, oh, how dare you? You should call DCFS on these people. Well, should I call DCFS on every parent that brings their kid into a liquor store? Because liquor kills more people than opioids.
Close to 3 times as many.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah. So you just named it. There are people out there that can responsibly parent.
And juice.
Use occasionally, recreationally, and put the kids over to grandma and grandpa's house and use. Those people exist.
And I think that's where sometimes
it's this idea that if you're a heroin addict, you're a habitual everyday user, you're going to neglect your kids because that's all you see in the news. And
I think that's also why we have these knuckleheads out there that are like, well, why do you need medication? Why do you need treatment? I used and I decided I didn't want to anymore and I just stopped. Because there's levels and there's so many factors that come into a substance use disorder.
I absolutely love that argument. And my retort to that argument is, all right, so there are people out there, when they say it's not a disease because I stopped on my own. There are people out there that have hepatitis C. Their body has certain antibodies that can cure the hepatitis C and they need no medication. So does that mean we should tell all the people that are dying in the hospital of hepatitis C, well, so-and-so cured hep C on their own without any medication, so get out of that hospital bed, take out that IVs, walk it off, Cubby Bear.
Right.
I mean, that's their attitude. They're so ignorant because, hepatitis C is a disease that can clear itself. Other people will die from it. Substance use can turn into a mental health disorder that people will die from it without medical intervention, without medical help, and other people can just stop and walk away. 2 exactly same scenarios.
And it's possible even with a diagnosis of substance use disorder that's accurate, some people can. There's so many environmental factors that play into it.
Yeah, there are.
It's like diabetes. Yeah. I remember Ned Presnell did a presentation and he showed a diabetes study that was done where they talked to people who just found out that they were borderline and they were given options. Hey, you can start going to these support groups. And what they found is it was like thousands of people in the study, and what they found was 3% of the people were able to make lifestyle changes on their own and not develop type 2 diabetes. 8% of the people through the support groups were able to not develop type 2 diabetes. So if you were to go talk to that 8% of the people in the study, or the 11% of the people in the study that didn't develop type 2 diabetes, and go, if you find out that you're borderline type 2 diabetes, do you need medication? They're going to be like, oh, heck no. I didn't need it. All you got to do is go to the meetings. Yeah. All you have to do is want it bad enough. Yeah. But that ignores the other 89% of the people in the study that ended up developing type 2 diabetes and needed medication. Yeah. So we can't look at a small outlier, and I think that's what happens. That's where that anecdotal stuff comes in. Yeah. Is people looking anecdotal. And once again, I feel like we've gotten away from harm reduction, but we're talking about harm reduction.
Harm reduction at its core, just so people can understand, is examining where a person is at in their life with their substance use or whatever. And saying, okay, well, you're not ready to make complete 180-degree change, but let's examine where you're at, the harm you're risking yourself, the harm you're risking society, and let's see how I can help you, okay? You're using dirty needles. You're at risk for hepatitis C and HIV. You're also at risk for spreading those diseases to people that don't use substances that you may or may not have unprotected sex with. So let's engage you in a syringe access program to reduce that risk. You're using a loan. You're not carrying Narcan. You're at risk for death. Let's examine that. All right, you have chaotic substance use, and you don't want to stop yet. Are you willing to stop the opioids? I could stop the opioids. Okay, well, I'm going to put you on Suboxone for now, which will reduce your chance of using opioids or dying from an opioid overdose, so you can continue to use cocaine, alcohol, until we get to a point where those are two substances that you want to stop using. We can't force all or none on people, because if they're not ready to do that, we're not going to be able to engage them in any services and help them at all.
Right. Well, it's kind of, I don't want to look at it this way, but I look at it this way. It's no different than that person who has got, as I sit here and drink my Monster Rehab, it's no different than somebody
I check my cell phone 10 times.
Who's got a cup of coffee in one hand and a cigarette or a vape in the other. Yeah. That's talking about people shouldn't be using mind-altering substances to get off of drugs. Yeah. Those are mind-altering substances, and yet we've given them an okay. Yeah. And I understand people are like, well, nobody's dying from that. Okay, how about sugar?
Wait, nobody's dying from energy drinks? BS. More people die from energy drinks than die from Suboxone.
And nicotine? Oh my goodness. We won't even get into it.
Yeah. Don't look at me like that. I only drink 2 a day. But more people die from energy drinks than Suboxone. More people die from acetaminophen than kratom. The numbers are just, completely don't support anything most of these people are saying.
And I think it's that ignorance that also makes people opposed to harm reduction. Yeah. And I'll throw out one more statistic that we haven't mentioned yet that I really liked. It's about the syringe access sites. Yeah. When the U.S. Surgeon General's report came out, it literally said that communities that have syringe access sites get people into treatment 3 to 5 times faster.
Well, they're 5 times more. People that use our program are 5 times more likely to enter drug and alcohol treatment.
Because what have you found? I think at one time you had a statistic where you had found that X number of people within a certain amount of time of coming in and obtaining their first syringe had come back and asked for help getting into treatment.
Amanda, what do you think? 25% of our participants we put into treatment, or do you think it's more?
I would say about that.
So about 25% of our participants we put into treatment. Now, my number was much higher when it was a smaller program. But as we expand, our number, is going to stay around the 30% range.
Okay. And that's awesome, because a lot of times, too, what people forget is that harm reduction is meeting people that are never going to have somebody meet with them otherwise. Yeah. And it's showing compassion to people that probably are never going to get compassionate care anywhere else.
No, and I said it in some Post article or whatnot, that it's not about this 9-cent needle I'm giving somebody. It's about the human connections and relationships they create when they walk into this office. We did karaoke Friday night. We had people actively using drugs come in and hit the mic and have a good time. It made them feel human. People that are unhoused right now, living in Vacos, got to come in on a Friday night, be around a bunch of loving, good people, sing karaoke. That moment of happiness, that could be that conscious shift where they're like, I want that life again. Right. But too many people shun drug users. It's like, oh, you can't come here. You can't come here because you're using drugs. No, come on, sing some karaoke, have some coffee. We're gonna do a game night, play some Cards Against Humanity. Do something. You give people that feeling that they're humans again, that somebody loves them and cares about them, and they're invited and welcome and not shunned by society because they have a mental health disorder. Their odds of wanting recovery are gonna skyrocket. And that's basics. That's psychology 101.
And I think still that's my struggle where I'm at. Is I look at and sometimes I forget that every RCC has a different focus.
Yeah.
You know, so I will look at one person's RCC and be like, man, look at all of the homeless people this one's meeting. Look at the active people this one's meeting. And I think instead of comparing, we need to try to do what we do best. But at the same time, remember that harm reduction should be a part of everything we do.
That's true.
You know, it doesn't matter if you're doing prevention, if you're doing early intervention, if you're doing treatment, if you're doing recovery supports. I think harm reduction should always be part of that discussion.
Yeah, because I mean, let's not even talk about. I mean, we talk about diet. We talk about, okay, well, you're going to have cross addictions when you get out of treatment. We all do it. Sex,
right?
Caffeine, nicotine, shopping. You're going. So we realize that these are activities you're going to engage in post-treatment, early recovery. So why don't we examine how those activities can reduce harm that's causing to you? Let's work on your intake on your energy drinks. Let's work on how much coffee you drink. Let's work on your sugar intake.
Let's not. We're good.
All harm reduction. I'm just saying.
Right. No, I'm fine.
Yeah, I know you're fine. I know you're fine. We'll talk offline.
Right, isn't that what everybody says, though? I mean, whenever you start hitting on something that they actually partake in. I see the same thing with, of course, we already talked about the fact that I come from a Christian background. I see the same thing in the church where people will look at, okay or excuse their sin or their negative behavior, but then sit there and look down on somebody else and judge them as being worse, right? Because I can make 10 trips through the Golden Corral buffet line, and I'm fine, but you over there smoking your cigarette, you over there shooting heroin, oh my gosh, you're horrible. You're a horrible person. You know, and until we can realize that we're all people and every single one of us sometimes we don't make the healthiest choices. Sometimes we don't make the best choices. And that doesn't mean that everybody doesn't deserve the same grace that we get for our own screw-ups.
Yeah. Aren't there 7 deadly sins, not just one?
Absolutely. And I don't think drug use was one of those. Isn't that weird? No, I know it's not. You know, but
one of them can be inferred, I believe, in them. But gluttony. Yeah, definitely one of them.
Yeah, gluttony's up there.
Yeah.
You know, so when we have a 300-pound pastor that's talking about people that use drugs are going to burn in hell, I think maybe he should look in that extra wide mirror and realize that he might be part of that list too. So I guess kind of in wrapping up, is there any nuggets of wisdom, any last things that you would want to say to the people listening?
I'm trying to figure where drug addiction would fall into the 7 deadly sins. Wrath and pride. Wrath. We could, if we're doing a theological study right here, wrath could be transferred over to resentments. All right. And that's all you need to start a meeting, right? Resentment, a pot of coffee. Yeah. So I mean, wrath could be resentments, and pride could be self-pride, ego. That drives a lot of our addiction or lack of self-acceptance, because we put that pride there because we have no self-acceptance. So I can infer 2 of the deadly sins being somewhat correlated to drug use. I'm a Buddhist Jew that follows the Jedi Council, by the way, so ignore my Christian theology. I'm
trying to follow all that. That just.
But I'm just saying. So, passing words. This world, God, was it Locke? I think it was John Locke. The world is short, brutish, and cruel. I think it was Locke or Hobbes. And he wrote Leviathan. God, I should know. I have tons of philosophy background. It's getting more brutish. Maybe not as short. Our life expectancy is longer. But the world is getting more brutish, and it's our fault. Social media, unfortunately, has not connected the world. It's more disconnected them, and it's created a lot of apathy. where people feel the need to say things behind the protection of a keyboard that in some situations might get them hit in the face. In some situations might get a restraining order, but they feel the safety behind that keyboard to say some pretty horrible things, especially to the parents that lost their child to an overdose. We as a country, we as a race are better than this. We need to start acting better. We need to teach our children better. Empathy, compassion, forgiveness is what we need more of and not what we are seeing now. There are way too many comments about, just let them die. Why do I have to pay for my insulin and the heroin addict doesn't have to pay for the Narcan? Okay, this is human life. This isn't tit for tat. There's a common enemy when it comes to that, and that's pharmaceutical companies jacking prices because the patent for insulin was sold for $1 by the inventors to keep the cost down so people could afford it. So if we were working together, but there is intentional division sometimes among our leaders that we need to be aware of. And I'm not trying to get all conspiracy on you, but they do. The more we fight against each other, the more that they can go start a war somewhere for oil.
See, and now you're making me want to pop in again. I was going to just let you finish, but I do want to say every time I see that, it drives me crazy. Why is my insulin okay? For starters, you know what? The problem is it's not an either or problem.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They can both be a problem. The fact that your insulin is $750 is a huge problem, but that doesn't make Narcan any less. I have been Narcan back to life 3 different times, and trust me, the hospital charged me out the wazoo for that Narcan.
Oh, yeah, they did.
And the other thing I tell people is, man, if you're this excited about insulin, do what a lot of us that give out free Narcan do. Have fundraisers. Raise that money, go buy some insulin, and give it away.
Hey, Matt, how many insulin pens I got right now? What? How many insulin pens we got right now? 6. Yeah, so?
So, yes, you guys do give out free insulin. Isn't that amazing? But yeah, it goes back to people are looking for problems instead of looking for solutions. People are looking for reasons to be offended and to see themselves as other than, instead of looking for ways for us to get along and work together.
Yeah, but that's it. That's all I got.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Chad. I appreciate your time, and I am sure I'll get back here again to talk to you about multiple things.
Please do.
Have a great day. In closing, I just want to thank you for listening to the podcast. Please join us every week for new episodes. If you want to connect with us further, if you have any questions, topics you'd like to hear in the future, or maybe would like to be on the podcast sometime, you can connect with us at betterlifeandrecovery.com. There's a Better Life and Recovery page on Facebook, or you can, we're on Twitter, BLIR_NPO. Also, this podcast is part of the Studio DNA Podcast Network. You can find out more about the network at studiodna.media. Thanks a lot. Y'all have a great week.